But in the meantime, we are going to jump in and start with the panelists. And as they speak, their image should come up and talk about what they're doing. So I'm going to start with some questions, and then please let us know if there is any issues hearing anybody. Just kind of send me a quick message or wave your hand. I'll watch the collective. And I'll start with some questions. I'll probably direct it at one panelist, but we will ask all of them to kind of give their perspective. I know I see Britt, I see Dana, I do not see Michelle. Michelle, are you? Oh, there you are, Michelle. Thank you. All right. So why don't we start with a question of, obviously, as I spoke to very briefly, COVID saw significant disruptions in our supply chain very quickly, and there was a lot of course correcting and then a lot of adjustments we saw throughout the year. So I'd love to hear from each food bank, what perspective you have as far as what the big disruptions were in your world with your particular suppliers in your region, so that we can get a good sense of really collectively what that impact was. On this one, I'll just start with alphabetical order. So I'll start with Dana for Community Food Bank. If you want to talk a little bit, and then Britt and Benito and Michelle, I'll ask you to chime in.
Great. Thank you, April. Good morning, everyone. I apologize for the mask, but Community Food Bank has a pretty strict mask policy that includes private offices, so I don't really have a choice. Yeah, you sort of made it feel like romper room, April. I'm going to date myself with that, trying to find everybody. The pandemic definitely disrupted our supply chain, and it's still disrupted. It's disrupted not just for food and food banking, but if you follow the news, it's disrupted for electronics, it's disrupted for containers, it's disrupted for all kinds of things. And it certainly had a significant impact on food supply chain and for food banking. One of the places that we definitely felt it was on the retail side, and we're still feeling that and still seeing that. And that's probably one of the, I could talk to you all about produce all day long, but one of the things I want to just sort of raise up for everyone is that retail as we know it in this country is fundamentally changing. If you're following the industry, there was an article a week or so ago, Kroger, which owns Fry's, is investing billions of dollars in these fulfillment centers that are robotic, that are designed to fulfill online orders. Online orders for Walmart were up 43% versus a year ago. And so what we're seeing at Community Food Bank is a significant reduction in retail donations for those that are picking up grocery rescue. This is going to continue. Even prior to the pandemic, millions of dollars were being spent by these big grocery chains to fix their supply chain and to stop the waste. And that's just been accelerated, and it's certainly been accelerated now with all of the online orders and the store pickups. They're collecting much more data on everybody that visits a grocery store than they've ever had before. And we've had some conversations with folks at like Albertsons Corporate and at Kroger, and they've put new programs in place to do inventory control. And so I absolutely will tell you, we've seen peak retail for donations. We've seen a plateau for the last 2 to 3 years, and it's going to start going in the other direction. So if you're depending on that retail rescue donation product, if you haven't already saw a decline, you're going to see it, and you should be preparing now for something that's going to replace it, because they're getting smarter, they're getting better at what they're doing, and we're really going to see a significant decrease in retail in the next 4 or 5 years. That's my forecast. As far as produce goes, I'll just say real quickly that what we've seen in Nogales this year has been more of a normal year versus what the last 2 years were. The last 2 years were significantly affected by really bad weather in Mexico, including hurricanes and things like that. And so we're actually outside of that graph a little bit that April showed earlier. As we sit right now, we're up about 9 million pounds year to date versus last year, and about 12 million pounds versus the year before that in Nogales. It's much more of where we were at about 3 years ago. And we can talk tons more about produce, and I don't want to hog this piece here, but that's sort of my opening piece of this, April.
Thanks so much, Dana. St. Mary's. Britt, I believe you're there. Can we hop over
Yes,
to
can
you?
you, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Okay, great. I got a new computer yesterday, so now my voice works on the video. So a disruption for us at St. Mary's really has been a few things really in the beginning when the COVID hit and there was a lot of hoarding going on in the retail outlets. It caused a lot of shortages of product and that increased our lead times. So our lead times would normally be, say, 2 weeks to secure inventory. That now went into 8-week cycle, maybe up to a 10-week cycle to actually get some canned goods. So also the prices on the products actually went up. So peanut butter might have been, let's say, $1, 15-ounce jar, 16-ounce jar, then it went to $1.45. So not only was the supply chain disrupted in the fact that we couldn't secure it as fast as we wanted, it is also the fact that we had to pay more for it. And in the beginning of COVID, as Dana had mentioned on the retail side, we saw actually it was on the food service side, we saw a glut of produce coming in from the food service companies because, as we all know, we changed the way we secured our food and we didn't actually go out to eat as often. And so there was a backup in the food service distribution end of the business. And all of a sudden, one day I should say 1 week, we saw one of our chains here in town, Cisco, give us 5 truckloads worth of produce because it was just sitting in their warehouse and it wasn't going anywhere since they weren't supplying restaurants with products. And then about 8 weeks later, we started to see the dairy items come into things that had a little bit longer shelf life. They started flowing in. And then that kind of all ended after a while. So in addition to that, there were some farmers who had crops already in the ground who were anticipating that food service demand. And that demand actually basically shut down. So they had extra product. So that inventory started hitting our building. So those were probably the biggest disruption in our business as far as the supply chain is concerned.
Thank you so much. Benito, for United, anything you'd like to add?
Hello. So for us, it was a little bit different. We did see a slight decline in the retail rescue product, but it was kind of a roller coaster. It was off and on, off and on. For key disruptions, one of our biggest disruptions was the volunteer activity, losing the large groups of volunteers to build the emergency food bags. So we had to switch from a pre-built emergency food bag to cased product until we were able to get back on track with that. Our purchased product that I was able to purchase in June, we did not receive until October, November timeframes. So that was definitely difficult and prices were high.
Thank you. And Michelle, for Yuma, do you want to share a little bit of what you all were seeing?
Sure. Sorry, I think I've had way too many Zoom calls and my camera stopped working today. So sorry, there's no camera. We kind of saw the same disruptions as the other food banks were talking about. Retail, suddenly those stores, they just didn't have any supplies to give us. So we saw the retail donations drop off. And then our normal community food drives that were going on, of course, all of that stopped. So now we don't have any donated product coming in here. Any product that we had on order, we were, a couple of them we were supposed to get within 1 to 2 weeks, and they were pushed back sometimes about 10 weeks. And we also had the disruption, no volunteers helping us. So it was a challenging time, and everybody, you just kind of had to put our heads together and figure out how we were going to feed these people when you have an increase of clients coming in up 60%. So, but we did see more produce coming in right about that time, because now, kind of like what Britt had mentioned, the grocery store, or excuse me, restaurants and then the schools were not accepting that product. So suddenly they had a glut and needed to get it out to us. So at least we did have some fresh produce going out to families.
Thank you, Michelle. And I imagine a lot of partners throughout the state felt very similar to what all of these 4 food banks felt, in addition to obviously getting the food shifting in that supply from us. So one thing I wanted to ask about, which I know we've gotten a lot of questions about, is the food boxes that started, the Farmers to Families food boxes, also known as CFAP, also known as 19 other things, I think, that I can't remember all the acronyms I've heard for them. And I've gotten a lot of questions around that program, what that looks like, food box in general. So I'll actually direct this at Britt, because I think he's probably been one of the great supports, and thank you helping to coordinate that for us. But Britt, can you share a little bit of what you know about that program and what shifts we might be seeing in that program coming up? And I think you're on mute.
There you go. How's that? So the program actually started in May of last year, so almost a year ago. And it was a result of the government seeing all the waste in the food, the milk that was being destroyed, that type of thing we all saw on the news. And so they tried to come up with a quick way to solve that issue and how we could keep the farmers in business and buy their products and still yet serve the community with their goods. So that's how it got started. It took a different form in the beginning. We received boxes of produce, boxes of meat, boxes of dairy, all individually. And then it morphed into a combination box is what we're talking about today. So today you see a box, as April had mentioned, and it has milk, cheese, butter, produce, meat in it, that type of thing. And that's about a 30-pound box of food. That program has been running ever since. It started in May of last year, and it appears that it's going to end at this moment in time, the end of May. And at the end of May, I think that program will hopefully cease and desist and turn into something different, a little bit new. And that would be is what we receive as entitlement funds from the government every year to buy goods from them to the USDA. And they're going to offer another item on that list of goods, and it will be a mixed produce box. So food banks will have the opportunity to buy a mixed box of produce going forward. And whenever that program takes place, I'm not sure when it's going to take place, but CFAP should go away by the end of May. And for the food banks here in Arizona, I think April could maybe expand, or maybe Dana, is to a program that they have going on in southern Arizona, which we will partake in sometime in July when that program gets going. So we still have some type of mixed box of produce, apparently, maybe not through the USDA, but through our own doing.
Thank you, Britt. Dana, do you want to jump in and share a little bit about that program?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Britt. So, in Nogales, we receive all the product that we receive is basically donated product, and the ability for us to take that is dependent on the quality. And as product gets more and more challenged, food banks aren't able to take it, agencies aren't able to take it because they don't have the ability to sort it. And so one of the things that we've been trying to do in Nogales for about 3 years is to find the funding to essentially start a repack operation so that we could staff, to have folks sort through that product and either take out the bad stuff and just create a bulk, bin or carton of one kind of commodity item. Or our ultimate dream was to build a mixed produce box. And so, like I said, we've been working on that for about 3 years to find some funding, and it sort of all came together. I don't know if the pandemic had anything specifically to do with it or if it was just the right time. But we were able to get the funding that we needed, sort of from private foundation kind of funding. And then some from Feeding America. They also have started investing some money in this that they've granted through to either food banks or to state associations. And so we started this program, sort of out of necessity, because there was a time early in the pandemic when we weren't really seeing a lot of loads cross the border, and we were sort of dependent on more challenged loads that we typically wouldn't have been able to take. At that time, we had National Guard troops sorting the product for us. So we started back in May of 2020 building produce boxes. For the most part, those were 5 to 6 items, 25 to 30 pounds. Maybe a load of produce that we typically would have had to say no to, that might only have been 50% good and 50% bad. We were able to sort that product, pull out the good stuff, and put it in these produce boxes. For the, probably for the first 6 months of that, the majority of those boxes stayed in our service area. And then we started getting some of the other grants that allowed us to bring on some temp employees, pay for packaging supplies and, storage trailers and all that kind of stuff that goes along with that. And ultimately, started building boxes that we could share more widely with folks in the state of Arizona and also outside of the state as a part of the Southwest Produce Co-op that April talked about. We've been fortunate enough to have additional funding come in through Feeding America that we're going to be able to purchase some product during the leaner months when we don't get a lot of produce donations, to be able to continue to build these boxes. Right now we have funding to continue this program through January of 2022. That's as far as we go with it, unless we get some additional funding. And we're trying to do that, trying to work on that. If you know any partners out there that want to help support getting folks produce boxes across the state, because literally when we ramp up this product program during the summertime, we're going to be able to supply boxes to all of the food banks in Arizona. And I would love to see the program continue, but it really is dependent on funding, because there's a human labor aspect to it that you have to pay folks to do that. So, but it's been very successful. Our clients and agencies love it. The feedback I've heard from other food banks that have got this product is that they absolutely love it too. And I think that it helps keep product out of the landfill and helps us to secure additional produce that we would not otherwise have access to, and which sort of stabilizes things in our supply chain a little bit. So, thanks.
Thanks so much for that. And I'll have to write down all those tips Bernard gave us so we keep finding funding for this program, because we are very excited about it. So I'll direct this question, maybe we'll start with Michelle, but would love everybody's perspective as we're on this concept of produce and this topic of produce. We've gotten many questions over the years of, wow, we're handing out like cases of tomatoes to people, or I'm seeing tons of salad, or, the frozen blueberries are burned in my memory from a few years ago. And cranberries, I believe, was one. So, we tend to get a lot of questions of like, why are we getting so much of this one type of food at this one time? And I know there's a lot of different reasons that could happen depending on the supply channel. So I'd love to hear, different perspectives on that. But maybe, Michelle, we start with your perspective a little bit and what you guys see in Yuma and why that might happen, why agency partners and our clients might get one type of product in abundance at certain times.
Sure. So if many of you do not know, Yuma is considered the winter lettuce capital of the world. That's what they tell us anyway. So Yuma County is responsible for 90% of the leafy vegetables that are grown in the United States of America. So you will see between November and March, actually still into April right now, a lot of leafy vegetables that are grown here and they're packaged. Yuma actually has 23 cooling plants. So all of that lettuce is pulled out of the ground, cleaned and packaged right here. So if there is any disruption in the market and they can't get that product out to restaurants, schools, grocery stores, etc., they of course are going to call us. So that's where you're going to see a huge amount of product. Right now, for example, just a heads up, the coolers are getting ready to shut down because they're wrapping up the season. So they're getting ready to move on. So you're going to start to see these coolers have excess product. So instead of putting them into the landfill, then they contact us so that we can move them. Today, for example, we got a call. We have 6 loads available. So just a heads up. So it's it's a feast or famine around here with this type of product. And in Yuma, you'll see leafy vegetables. You'll start to see onions coming out of the field, melons. And we try to forecast the best that we can so that everybody kind of has an idea of what's going to be available. But it really depends on season, how the weather is, and how the market is.
You're muted, April.
Oh, can't hear you, April.
Thank you. Thank you, Michelle. So kind of going in reverse alphabetical order now. Benito, do you want to share a little bit of what United sees? And because I think it's a little bit of different supply channels, although we do love to send you all of that lettuce too, and all of that salad mix from Michelle.
Yes, we definitely love the donated product. That's what's giving us the variety. For the past year and a half, 2 years, United's distributed a lot of apples, oranges, and potatoes all through mitigation. That's kind of limited what we've been able to take out of Yuma and Tucson. So we're excited to get back on that track. The produce boxes are wonderful. We really love them. So thanks to all the hard work on that. It gives our agencies a variety of different products as opposed to the single case of tomatoes or lettuce that we were used to. For the CFAT boxes, the mixed boxes that were going away, we will miss them just because there wasn't like the signatures and all the regulations attached to it. So United was able to try different new approaches to distributing food, especially with the contactless distribution.
Absolutely, thank you. Britt, your perspective from St. Mary's, some of these big fluxes of products and other causes that you've seen.
Okay, thanks. Sure, I could give you my opinion, and Dana's probably going to have one also. Hopefully he'll agree. And that is that I think in the simplest terms, it's the supply exceeds demand situation. So for some reason or other, either the planting was good or the weather had impeded growth or the weather actually helped the growth or the demand on this side of the border, because most of this product was coming out of Mexico other than Michelle's situation. And that caused, say, an influx of food. As you said, tomatoes right now are receiving quite a few loads. So as you also mentioned earlier, April, and that's the fact that when donors look to donate food, we want to say yes, because if we say no, they may not come back to us in the future because they want to be sure they can move their product through the system quick. And so they rely on us to help them do that. And so we take full loads of tomatoes. And an example right now, as you mentioned, we are giving away full cases at our night and surprise distribution center of tomatoes to every household that comes by to pick up food. So we help that supply chain and get the food out into the community. Even though a family may not need a whole box of tomatoes, they might give some to their neighbors, whatever it might be. So that's where it's actually going. And I think we're in the business to feed the community the best we possibly can.
Great, thank you, Britt. Dana, anything you'd like to add from community's perspective?
Yeah, Britt's absolutely right. So there's a couple of primary reasons that produce gets donated in Nogales. One is quality deterioration, so they just can't sell it to someone. And the other one is that market conditions in the US essentially. Probably 65% or maybe 70% of the loads that come into the US out of Mexico through Nogales, and it's about 5+ billion pounds a year with a B. So it's a lot. Probably 70% of those loads are contracted years in advance. They're coming north no matter what, even if there's not a market for it. And what will happen is that if there's a abundance of tomatoes out of Florida, North Carolina, for example, the tomato market just goes south, and the Mexican produce can't be sold here. Those products still coming across. Now, sometimes growers down in Mexico will cut their losses because they don't want to lose the transportation dollars too, and they'll just dump product in Mexico. We're actually working with some food banks and some growers in Mexico to try to capture some of that stuff that's going to waste down there. But the loads come across, and what's sitting here is aging, and the new stuff's coming in, and so the donors will, they'll call us and they'll ask us to get it out of their building as quickly as we can, so that the new stuff has a home, because they've got to get the driver unloaded that came across the border, because it's pretty much impossible to send stuff back across the border. And so that's sort of the cycle that you get into. Weather certainly plays a role. Market conditions in the US are probably the biggest driver of it. One of the things that my folks do in Nogales every day as they look at the USDA commodity prices for produce across the country to see what those prices are, because those are very strong predictors of donations that we're going to see. If we see prices sort of dropping and, like watching the stock market, if you see your stock, bottoming out or something, we're in trouble, and that means we're going to get donated product from that. So that's the biggest driver for us that we see in the produce world.
Thank you. So one thing, whoever wants to expand on it, Michelle, Dana, Britt, or Benito. I know Benito mentioned trade mitigation. I know TFAP bonus loads can also cause a bit of a flux of product. Can somebody speak a little bit to kind of how that works and why, to sort of see where some of maybe those dry goods impacts and or even some produce in the most recent trade mitigation, why and when that can happen?
I mean, I could talk really quick about it and then let somebody else jump in. The TFAP program includes the commodity items that you all see in the emergency food bags that we build. It also includes what we call bonus items. It has included some trade mitigation things in the past that had to do with some of the, trade tariff stuff going on with China and Canada. The most important thing to know around that system is that it's also market driven. The TFAP program is underneath the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill is not a hunger relief piece of legislation. It's a piece of legislation that's designed to prop up farmers and to stabilize market conditions for food in the U.S. And what the government does is they'll buy commodity items that there's an excess of. For example, blueberries. If the blueberry production was really good and the bottom's going to drop out of the prices, then the government's going to buy up some of the blueberries to help stabilize those prices. And then what happens is those products get offered to food banks and other entities that contract with their state or through the federal government for the TFAP program, which is the Emergency Food Assistance Program. And so it's those very same market conditions that we've been talking about that see those giant fluctuations. We saw that under what was called the Trade Mitigation Program, that was in a mitigation program, if you will, designed to help farmers and producers in this country that were suffering due to the tariffs that were primarily put on China, but also on Canada with dairy products and some other things. And so, food banks got offered a tremendous amount of product, and there's a certain amount of pressure that comes on us to take that product and not say no to it. That's part of the expectation of the funder, right? Which is Department of Economic Security. And so we saw enormous amounts of protein like we never saw. This is my 11th year in food banking. And under the 2 or 3 years of trade mitigation, we saw more, frozen protein, animal protein kind of products, dairy protein than I have ever seen in my whole experience. And now that it's gone, we've sort of gone over that cliff. A little bit of that is being supplied by what they're calling COVID relief, which is another program that's coming under that TFAP program. Some specialty items and additional money. I think we got about $1.6 million to purchase some of that money through the federal government programs. But once all that goes away, there's still a cliff out there for folks. Our agencies, our clients have become very dependent on seeing milk, on seeing the frozen chickens and frozen hams and all kinds of product associated with that, seeing the apples and the oranges. Prior to trade mitigation, we saw 0 apples being donated to us. We don't have them in our area. They don't come out of Mexico. And so, it's market conditions. It's, the political environment that we've lived in for the last, few years, trying to help mitigate some of the things around that. I think that, once we sort of stabilize out of the pandemic, what we're going to see on the government commodity side is probably a shrinkage of the bountiful, plentiful stuff that we've been used to. And that's another thing I think that food banks really need to strategically be preparing for, and certainly agency partners that partake of that. What's your plan a year from now? What's your plan 18 months, 2 years out from now on when that food comes back to just that emergency food bag and a few bonus loads a year? What are we going to do to fill that gap for folks when they've had 2 or 3 plus years of being used to that kind of bounty of food?
And I could add on to that what Dana had just mentioned. For the sake that some numbers I could give you, just to give you an idea how big that trade mitigation really was that Dana was referencing. And that is last September, October, November, December, we at St. Mary's were receiving 95 truckloads of food from the government per month. And in January, so after trade mitigation had ended at the end of December, the number of loads that we receive now are in the 45 range. So it basically cut our food supply in half from the government. That doesn't mean we're out of food. It doesn't mean there's going to be a shortage of food. But what it does mean is that, as Dana also mentioned, is the animal protein that he's seen come in, we've seen the same thing. And so what we did is we went to outside storage and rented it and put some of that food in outside storage. And now we can safely say at this point in time through our TFAP agencies that we can give away animal protein almost for the next year based on what we have in storage and what's we can see coming in the near future through the end of December of this year. So, and the government puts a restriction on those items, by the way, for your information, that is that we have to move them out in 6 months. We cannot hold any of their products longer than a 6-month period of time. So just to add to what Dana had said.
Thank you so much. So headed into, and I appreciate those explanations. I think it's helpful to kind of understand into the next question of what might be coming and what we're foreseeing. So we've talked a little bit about some boxes we're working on. We've talked a little bit about the shifts in some of the commodity programs, obviously the produce world. But could you all just give a little bit of sort of an overview of what you're thinking the rest of 2021 looks like? I know it's hard to predict such things, but let's say the next 6 months to a year, what are you planning on? What do you think those food supply channels will look like for you? And anything that would be great for agency partners and or hunger relief partners to keep in mind as they're planning how to best support their clients. And why don't we start with Benito this time? Just kind of jumping around and then we'll go from there.
Okay, for United, we still have food, so we'll continue to serve. We're not lacking. Food will look different. Definitely less meats, definitely less fruits. But we do have access to the Yuma and Tucson produce, so we're back to produce, back to fresh vegetables, less fruit. Yeah, we also have the off-site storage. So like Britt was saying about the animal protein, we're also storing off-site so that way we can spread it out. So the cliff won't be as bad. Where our agencies were used to seeing 4 items of meat every month, now it's going to go down to 1. It's not going to be 4 pallets. It might be 1 or 2 pallets. So that it's not as stressful, but you'll still receive your product. For purchase product, we have purchased stuff out that's not going to come in until the fall, but that's just because of the supply chains and the effects on that.
Thank you, Benito. Michelle, how about for you, Ma?
Yeah, about the same as what Benito was saying. We still have plenty of food, so nobody's going to go hungry. But we are seeing clients got used to seeing all of the fresh milk. And they got used to seeing that meat. So we're continuing, talking to the clients, reaching out. We've had some additional resources. We've reached out to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They've been a great source for us to help us kind of offset some of the TFAP product that we have here, just to kind of fill in those gaps. If I'm not going to have fresh milk, they have been able to give us some powdered milk. So we're just kind of forecasting, looking out to see what these clients have been used to getting, to try to fill those gaps. Lots of fresh produce, focusing on that. We'll be sad to see the CPAP program go away because, of course, all of the clients really enjoyed that, or as they refer to them as the Corona boxes. But we saw an increase in private donors donating funds to us and some additional grant funding. So I have only been here going on my 4th year, and we are looking to purchase quite a bit of food in this next year. So just to make sure that all of the clients that are coming through here, that we can supplement their diets and what they need in their households the best that we can. So.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Dana, how about for Community Food Bank?
Yeah, so we have a lot of food coming in between now and the end of the year, from the commodity side of it, from some of the extra COVID relief stuff. The problem from my perspective is that all comes under the TFAP umbrella. Only about a third of our agency partners are able to take product under the TFAP program, either by choice, because they just don't want to deal with the compliance requirements, or they're unable to, other agencies are unable to meet the compliance requirements. So we have a significant number of agencies that, you know, for the last 10 months or so have really benefited from that CFAP box. Because, you know, it's a dairy, some protein in there, animal protein and produce. That box has been able to go to anyone. And we've tried to prioritize getting that to non-TFAP agencies. And those are the ones that are going to sort of get left out in the cold a little bit, because our ability, I've put some money in our budget to try to supplement specifically for those agencies to help get them, you know, some product that they wouldn't otherwise be able to get. We'll certainly have fresh produce for them, but those are the ones that I'm most concerned about. You can't spend your way out of this, because there's no way that we have enough resources to be able to replace, you know, what we were giving to those agencies through like the CFAP program. And so that's sort of the two-edged sword of being dependent, you know, on the government commodities right now, and all the COVID mitigation pieces coming at us for the foreseeable future are tied to TFAP and tied to the regulations and collecting signatures and doing all of that stuff that, you know, makes this business hard sometimes when you're just trying to help people. And so I think that's the biggest challenge.
Thank you. Britt, anything you'd like to add on for St. Mary's?
I think everybody is spot on for what you just heard from the other three panelists right now. They've touched all the points. I agree with Benito in respect that we're going to have plenty of food, and if we don't have the food, we will go buy the food. So an example is, as Dana was just mentioned, the USDA cut 10 loads of canned vegetables from us, and we went out and sourced those for ourselves so that we wouldn't have a supply problem. So the other change would be is the CFAP box, as everybody's mentioned. If it goes away at the end of May, we'll pick up the produce box coming out of Southern Arizona sometime in July. So we'll still have a mixed produce box. As Dana also mentioned, the milk would be a different situation because we don't have a source for that, and nor would we probably go out and be able to secure it and be able to afford to secure it just day in and day out to give everybody milk. But our ratio is about the same as his. About 1/3 of the agencies that we have are receiving TFAP, so government food, and everybody else gets the food that's donated or what we have to secure to make sure that we have food for everybody. So.
Before we head into questions, one note, I see a couple comments about, you know, communication and things like that. And I think Brent's was addressed by Charity. So thank you, Charity, for jumping in. And Beth mentioned one thing I'll note that from the produce co-op standpoint, we're talking about a lot of donations that Michelle spoke to and Dana spoke to in these boxes that we're doing that we're very excited about. I do think I missed acknowledging when we talked about the co-op is when we get that produce donated. Typically, we have 5 days to try to get it into the hands of clients, or maybe a little longer, depending on the product type. So I do know that some of those fluctuations are sometimes hard. I obviously don't know all the food bank processes, but I will say from our perspective, it's hard to let the food banks know what's going to be available to them in advance. And it's really, hey, we've got all of this today. Can you take it tomorrow? And then they take it, and then they have to try to get it out and into hands of clients within a few days maximum. So I know that the time is constrained specifically for produce that I missed mentioning in the Southwest Produce Co-op to talk a little bit about how quickly and how frequently we operate under very short timelines to try to make sure we can rescue as much of that produce and get it to clients when it's still usable. So there's a couple questions that are in the chat that I'll start with, and then we'll see where we get to with time. Beth from Nourish Phoenix had asked about purchasing products. So there are a lot of agencies looking to purchase product, and I know that many of them also ran into challenges in COVID, as we did on all levels, purchasing product. Things were hard to come by, but just in general, looking to purchase product for specific programs. And she's asking if any food banks kind of do that cooperative purchasing, and or I would just add on to that, is there any advice you'd give for food banks who are trying to purchase and maybe trying to scale up and get kind of better deals by purchasing, larger amounts, knowing that they don't always need larger amounts. So any of the food banks that like to jump in and talk a little bit about purchasing for agency partners that are looking to purchase.
Like, this is Britt, and I think I could comment in one respect. I'm not sure everybody's aware of it, but down here for shopping or otherwise, we have a program where people can actually, agency can buy food, and it's a selected amount of SKUs that we have that we always try to keep in stock all the time, so that they could buy it at our cost as opposed to paying the retail markup. But it's a limited number of items, about 15 to say 20 roughly. And some of that includes eggs and milk for the agencies that actually come here and do the shopping. So there is an option there. I'm not sure everybody has the ability to actually get here to do that. But that's the only opportunity that we have to help to share in that respect.
Thank you, Britt. Other ideas or comments from any of the other panelists?
Well, the only thing I would share, April, is costs are definitely going up on food across the board. One of the things I would suggest, if you're an agency that's doing grocery rescue, work on that partnership with your store, talk to the manager. A lot of times if you go and talk to them, like if you have a Walmart or something and you go to talk to the manager and say, hey, I would like to buy this much product, can you guys help me out? Sometimes they'll be able to give you a discount. Each Walmart manager has discretionary grant funds that he or she can give out to community partners. And I've seen some of our agencies get a few $100s from some of these individual Walmart stores. So if you're doing grocery rescue, you have that partnership sitting out there, develop those relationships. That's one of the strengths that you can do, and you can save a little bit of money that way. I think you guys can also work together, whether or not the food bank that you're supported by has a formal program to bring agencies together. We sort of have a loose affiliation down here in Tucson, sort of an advisory council for agencies, and I know some of those folks have got together and sort of combined their funds. Really, you've got to buy in pretty big, significant quantities to get much of a discount. We're probably talking truckload quantities type of things. But more and more, food manufacturers and sort of the food brokers of the world have sort of figured out that food banks are purchasers. And a lot of them will supply, like, you don't have to buy a truckload to get the discount. You may have to buy 1 or 2 pallets. Like, so for example, if you're going to buy cereal or something, you might have to buy a couple of pallets from somebody like LA Foods or somebody like that. And so if you can partner with some other agencies and maybe combine your costs, you can get some savings by doing that. And, I know we certainly have lists of, I get 15 emails a day from people trying to sell me food, specifically to the food banking industry. I'm sure St. Mary's has the same list. And then the other thing I would just suggest to you is don't forget your like Sam's Club and Costco's, because we were trying to buy some water here and got a bunch of prices. Our community kitchen did, and I suggested they went to Costco, and they actually gave us a deal below what they normally sell it for, because we were going to buy a truckload of water. And so just developing those relationships, go in and introduce yourself to the managers of these places and say, hey, can you help me out? It's like what our keynote speaker was saying, right? If you don't ask, nobody's gonna volunteer to help you, right? And then if you're buying smaller quantities, the last thing that I'll share, you can hit your dollar stores up, right? Because a lot of times, you got to watch the codes, the expiration dates, but you can definitely save some money on some stuff in there that might be helpful too. So those are just my thoughts.
Really great tips, Dana. Thank you. So on that note, I know we only have a couple minutes left, but Dave had asked on that note of codes. You know, in retail, it's getting harder to know what should be waste and what can be given out because of, you know, the food dates, prepared food, ready to eat foods, what the code dates are on things.
Yep.
It's just sometimes challenging to determine that. Do any of you have a great source or suggestion on where agencies can get a really good understanding or information on what things should be wasted versus what things are still okay to give to clients, specifically from a grocery rescue kind of?
So there's one app out there that I'll share with people, April. It's called Food Keeper. It's an iOS and an Android app. It's got some helpful stuff. It doesn't have a lot of like brand kind of stuff in there. So sometimes you still may find yourself saying, huh, where does this item fit? There's also a website called Eat by Dates, Eat by Dates. They don't have an app that I know of now, but it's a website out there that you can go into. You can also just Google the product. A lot of times you'll find that. But, you know, part of this is talking to your store about it too. A few years ago, you know, I walked into a Safeway and saw yogurt marked down because it was short code date, right? They marked it down to like 50 cents because it only had like 4 or 5 days left. And that was like the doom of the death note of retail donations. And I don't want to be like the black cloud here talking about this, but retail is spending millions and millions of dollars to get super smart on how to do this. And they would rather mark stuff down to the point where they give it to you with 1 day of life left on it than they would and get that quarter for it rather than donate it early and take a little bit of the tax credit or avoid the waste. Because the other thing we've become the waste channel for these guys, right? So no matter what the dates are, pretty much we're going to take it and we end up throwing it away and they don't have to worry about it. So one of the conversations you can have with your grocery stores is, you know what, I can't do anything with stuff if you give it to me with 1 day of life left on it. You got to help me out. I know you're trying to reduce, you know, capture every dollar that you can. I have had corporate people from Kroger, from Fry's, from Albertsons tell me this is a business. And that's how you have to start thinking about it. The individual in the store that's doing this philanthropy thing to try to help the community is one thing, but the corporate policy, it's about business. It's about making money, reducing their waste, reducing their costs, passing on those costs to food banks, because we are their waste stream solution. And I don't want to be the negative guy around this, but that's the future. And there's really no way to avoid us intersecting with that future, and it's going to mean less food, especially on the grocery side. We've just seen it across the board on all different kind of commodity items. And so what we have to do as this industry is we got to figure out how to work it differently, and how to find different sources of food, and how to fundraise to buy food, because there's no escaping it. You know, Britt, you've talked about what you guys can do. We're behind the game and having availability of funds to buy food like some other food banks do, but that's the future. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of things that we could do to avoid it, because there's so many people working the food waste channels and the inventory control piece for these guys, and they're super smart people, and the technology is super smart, and they're learning more about consumers' buying habits because of everything we're doing associated with online and store pickups. And the machine is just getting so much smarter that it's going to get harder and harder to do this job on a donation only.
Thank you, Dana. That is helpful and I think great perspective. Well, I believe our breakout is just about done, so we might get kicked out, but if we, so I'll see if we might linger on for another minute, but I just want to thank everybody, thank the panelists, Benito, Britt, Dana, Michelle, for all of that great insight. I think it was lots of really good information. Appreciate you being here. Thank you for those that asked questions. I'm sure all 4 of them would be more than happy to connect and answer questions. And of course, your agency relations folks are great resources for additional information. And I'm happy to share any information, april@azfoodbanks.org, or make any connections if you'd like. So thank you all so much for your time, and I appreciate the perspective and information. Have a wonderful rest of the conference, and hopefully you all enjoy your future sessions. Thank you all.